The winter that year came early, and it came cruel. Snow buried the deep forests of the Blackmere territory under 3 feet of white silence. Beyond the last marker stone. Beyond the reach of any pack. Beyond the place where even the bravest hunters turned their horses around and rode home to their fires. That was where the woman lived. They didn't speak her name in the villages anymore. They called her the ghost of Hollow Pine. A story mothers told to keep children close to the hearth. A shape in the tree line. A thing that had once been a girl and was now, they said, only cold. But she had a name. Isolde. And she was 23 years old, though 5 winters in the wild had aged her far past that. 5 winters of frostbite and hunger, and the kind of loneliness that hums in your bones like a second heartbeat. She knelt in the snow, now bare fingers working fast, and snapped the neck of a rabbit caught in her snare. Clean. Quick. Merciful in the way she had always wished someone had once been merciful to her. Because she remembered mercy. She remembered a long time ago what it felt like to be held. And she remembered more clearly than anything the night they took all of it away. The great hall of the Silver Lake stronghold. Firelight on old stone. The smell of roasted venison and pine, and the perfume her sister always wore. The whole pack gathered, hundreds of faces turned toward her, and not one of them kind. And him, Aldrich, the future Alpha, her fated mate, chosen by the moon herself, standing tall in front of everyone she had ever loved. She could still see the exact shape of his mouth as he said the words. Could still feel the way her chest caved inward, like a roof under too much snow. I, Aldrich of the House of Thornwood, reject you, Isolde. You are weak. You are treacherous. You are unfit to stand at my side. Weak. That word had followed her into the wild like a wolf of its own. But the rejection wasn't the true wound. The rejection was only the last stone laid on top of a grave that someone else had spent months digging. Her twin sister, Rosalind. The same face as Isolde, near enough. The same amber eyes, the same chestnut hair, though Rosalind wore hers in golden braids and kept her skin soft and her hands clean. They had shared a womb. They had shared a childhood. And when the moon paired quiet, unremarkable, Isolde with the strongest alpha in 3 territories. Rosalind had smiled at the ceremony and started planning the ruin that very night. It was Rosalind who slipped wolfsbane into the pack's winter grain. Rosalind who tucked the leftover roots beneath the floorboards of Isolde's own room. And when 3 elders fell sick coughing black, the pack wanted blood. They found the poison exactly where Rosalind had left it. And Aldrich, who had always let his eyes linger on Rosalind a beat too long, who wanted a stronger mate anyway, did not hesitate. They stripped Isolde of her pack markings. They beat her. The enforcers dragged her to the edge of the territory by her hair and threw her into the snow like something spoiled. The scars on her back had healed into thick silver ribbons. They ached in the damp. A map of that night written on her skin so she could never forget, even if the mercy of forgetting ever came. It never did, so she survived instead. Out of spite, mostly. Out of a small, stubborn ember of rage that refused to go cold, no matter how many winters tried to put it out. Isolde tied the rabbit to her belt, and turned back toward the cabin. She was thin, too thin. Cheekbones sharp as flint, her clothes a patchwork of stolen sheep's wool, and cured deer hide her hair matted from years without a proper comb. But her eyes were still fierce, still amber, still hers. For 4 years, she had been utterly alone out here. No voice but her own. No warmth but the fire she built with her own 2 hands. And then, last winter, everything changed. Because last winter, she had found Maren, an old woman half frozen at the base of a ridge left there by her own pack, the way you'd leave a lame horse. Too old to hunt, they'd said. Too old to be useful. Her mate long dead, her children grown and ashamed of her, her hands too knotted with age to weave. So they'd walked her out past the border under some kind excuse, and simply never walked her back. Isolde had found her by the sound. A thin, reedy humming. An old song sung to keep herself company while she waited to die. And Isolde, who knew exactly what it felt like to be thrown away, could not leave her there. She had carried Maren home on her back through a blizzard. 1/2 mile. It took most of the night, and she had not regretted a single step of it since. So now, when Isolde pushed open the heavy oak door, warmth met her, and the smell of drying herbs, and a voice dry and amused from the corner by the hearth. "You're late," Maren said, not looking up from the poultice she was grinding. "I was beginning to plan your funeral. I'd chosen very flattering words." "Rabbit," Isolde said, and held it up. "Ah, forgiven then." Because that was how they were, sharp and soft in the same breath. 2 thrown-away women in a cabin at the end of the world, keeping each other alive, out of nothing but stubbornness and love. Maren had taught her much in the months they'd shared. How to read a fever, how to draw poison from a wound with the right root, how to set a bone. Old Omega medicine, the healing kind, the kind the pack had never valued, because it didn't make you stronger in a fight. It only kept you from dying. Only that. "Sit," Maren said. "Your hands are blue. Warm them before you lose a finger and blame me for it." And Isolde sat, and for 1 small hour in the flicker of the fire she was almost content. Which was, of course, exactly when the world ended. It started with silence. Isolde noticed it first, the way you notice a sound stopping. The winter birds went quiet. The wind through the pines died mid-breath. Even the fire seemed to hold still. And then her inner wolf, silent and sleeping for 5 long years, slammed itself against her ribs so hard she dropped the knife. She gasped, grabbed the edge of the table. Her heart hammered against her breastbone like it wanted out. Isolde, Maren was upright now, all the humor gone from her face. Old eyes, but not blind. What is it? Something's coming. Because she could feel it. A pressure. A weight in the air pressing down on the whole forest thick enough to taste. An aura of pure dominance, the crushing command of an alpha, but scaled to something monstrous, something that belonged to no pack she knew. Then came the sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Not one set of footsteps. Many. The floorboards began to hum beneath her feet, as heavy paws broke through the icy crust of the snow, closing in, disciplined and slow. Isolde counted without meaning to. 1, 3, 7, 10, 10, 10, 10 massive somethings circling the cabin in a slow, deliberate ring. And then, beneath the pause, a different sound. The heavy, patient thud of leather boots. A man. A man walking among beasts as if they were his shadow. "Get behind me," Isolde breathed, and grabbed her spear from the wall. A long ash branch, tipped with iron, scavenged from a ruined carriage years ago. Crude, but hers. "Isolde," Maren said quietly, I am 81 years old. I will get behind no one. But she reached for the fire poker all the same. The scent came through the cracks in the walls first, and it was overwhelming. Ozone, crushed pine, fresh blood, something ancient and feral and unmistakably northern, nothing like the musk of the Silver Lake pack. This was older, colder. This was the smell of a thing that had never once in its life been afraid. Then the voice. We know you're in there, exile. Deep, gravelly, a baritone that seemed to come up through the floor and settle in the marrow of her bones. Come out into the light, or my men will pull this hovel down around you. Isolde's mind raced, because there was only one thing this could be. Aldrich had finally come to finish it, or Rosalind had decided that exile wasn't enough, that as long as her twin drew breath somewhere in the woods, the throne she'd stolen would never feel entirely safe. Except this scent was wrong. This wasn't Aldrich. This wasn't anyone from home. And that somehow frightened her more. She looked at Maren. Maren looked back and gave her a single nod. The kind of nod that said, we don't cower. Not us. Not ever again. So Isolde lifted the bar off the door, and kicked it open, and stepped out into the killing cold, with her spear raised and her chin high. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. 10 wolves, but not wolves like any she had ever seen. These were monsters, each one the size of a warhorse shoulder to shoulder in a perfect unbroken semicircle around her cabin. Coats of slate and charcoal and pure obsidian. Bodies crossed with old scars, and their eyes all 10 pairs glowing with a cold, lethal intelligence that no ordinary animal ever carried. But it was the man in the center who turned her blood to ice. How was enormous. 6'7", perhaps taller, his shoulders broad enough to blot out the weak winter sun behind him. Black chainmail beneath a heavy cloak of bearskin. A face built from hard angles, a jaw like an anvil, and a brutal jagged scar running from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth. Hair black as a raven's wing swept across his brow. And his eyes. Pale-piercing winter storm gray. And they were locked on hers with an intensity that felt like a hand closing around her throat. She knew him. Everyone knew him. King Torvald of the Ashford line. The Iron King of the North. A legend whispered by southern fires. A conqueror who had bound a dozen warring territories into one kingdom through brilliance and blood in equal measure. They said he had never lost a battle. They said he had never once shown mercy. They said his heart had frozen solid decades ago and never thawed. And he was standing in her yard. Lower the weapon, little bird, Torvald said. His voice was almost gentle, which was somehow the most menacing thing about it. This is unclaimed land. Isolde's voice came out rough, scraped raw from years of near silence. You have no right here, King Torvald. Leave. A ripple of low growls rolled through the 10 wolves at her defiance. But Torvald raised a single gloved hand, and the beasts fell silent as stone. The control he held over them was its own kind of terror. I have jurisdiction, he said, taking one slow, heavy step forward, snow groaning under his boot, wherever a threat to my kingdom hides. And I am hunting a very particular threat. A coward who calls himself Aldrich of Thornwood. Isolde went very still. He crept into my northern vaults, Torvald went on, watching her face for every flicker. And he stole something that was not his to steal. The Ember Heart, a relic older than my crown. And my scouts tell me that you, his discarded treacherous Omega, are the last soul alive. Who knows where his hidden sanctuary lies?" And Isolde laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out of her broken and bitter and sharp enough to cut echoing off the trees. "You think I'm hiding the man who destroyed me?" She shook her head slowly. "He didn't just cast me off, King Torvald. He let my sister frame me for murder. He watched them beat me. He threw me to the winter and expected the winter to do his killing for him." Torvald stopped. His eyes narrowed. And for the first time, he truly looked at her. Not at the spear, not at the threat. At her. The ragged clothes. The hollow cheeks. The scars just visible at her collar. The fury burning behind her eyes that 5 years of starvation had failed to put out. And then, the wind changed. A sharp gust rose off the ridge and swept from Isolde toward the king, and Torvald froze. His massive chest stopped moving entirely. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray until his eyes were pools of black. A violent tremor ran the length of his enormous frame, and a snarl tore out of his throat. Low, primal, the sound of something ancient waking up. Isolde felt it too. It hit her like lightning through the sternum. A sudden blinding warmth flooding her frozen veins, racing to her fingertips, filling the hollow places that 5 years of cold had carved out. And her inner wolf, whimpering with fear only a moment ago, threw back its head and howled in savage, disbelieving joy. The mate bond. No, 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 no. Not him. Not this. Not the king hunting the man who ruined her. Not now. Not ever. Mate, her wolf sang, drunk on it. King, ours, ours, ours. No, Torvald ground out, staggering back a step, one huge hand pressed to his chest like he'd been shot. His voice was a distorted growl, a man wrestling his own nature to the ground. No, a trick. This is a trick. A cursed thing from the treacherous south. He fought it. She could see him fighting it, every muscle, straining 30 years of iron will thrown against a decree written by the moon herself. To find his fated mate, after 3 decades of searching every corner of his kingdom here. In the frozen dirt. In a starving exile bound by history to the very criminal he'd come to kill. The cruelty of it was almost funny. Almost. "Secure her!" Torvald roared, and his voice cracked down the middle with the strain of holding his wolf back. "Do not harm her. Bind her hands. She rides back to camp with us." 2 of the great wolves shimmered and shifted. Fur to skin, paw to hand, and where beasts had stood, 2 towering warriors now rose unbothered by the cold. One dark, one fair. Halvard and Emmerich, though Isolde didn't know their names yet. They advanced on her faces caught between confusion and absolute obedience. Isolde thrust her spear forward, backing toward the doorway, where Maren stood gripping the iron poker. "Stay back. I won't go back to a pack. I won't be a prisoner again. I would rather die in this snow than wear another collar." "You are not a prisoner," Torvald shouted, and there was something almost desperate underneath the command, his dark eyes at war with themselves. "But you are coming with me, Isolde. Whether you're a traitor or a victim or my own damnation, you belong to Winterfang now. And I will have the truth of you, if it tears us both apart." Halvard reached for the spear, and that was when the old woman stepped into the doorway. "Touch her," Maren said in a voice that had gone very quiet and very cold. "And I will curse the marrow in your bones, Wolf King. I am old. I have nothing left to lose. That makes me the most dangerous thing in this clearing." Everyone stopped. Torvald's gaze shifted to the old woman, took in her age, her frailty, the poker shaking in her spotted hands, and then took in something else. The way the exile had moved without thinking to put her own body between the old woman and 10 war-trained wolves. Something crossed his scarred face. Confusion. And beneath it, unwilling the smallest flicker of respect. "Who is she to you?" Torvald asked. "She's mine," Isolde said. Simple, fierce, final. The pack threw her out to die because she got old. I carried her home. If your men lay one hand on her, you can carry my body back to your camp, King, because I promise you, it's the only way I'll go quietly." The clearing held its breath, and King Torvald, the man who had never once shown mercy, looked at this starving woman defending an old crone in the snow and felt the bond in his chest pull so hard it nearly brought him to his knees. "Both of them," he said at last, his voice rough. "The old woman rides too. No one touches either of them. That's a command." Halvard blinked. "My king the crone is under my protection now, as is the Omega. Anyone who forgets that answers to me." And just like that, Isolde's spear lowered an inch. Only an inch. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone, and she had 5 years and a spine full of scars to justify it. But a man who would shelter an old woman he had no reason to shelter was not the same kind of monster as the men who had made her. Not quite. Not entirely. Which was in its own way the most dangerous discovery of that whole terrible day. They bound her hands, but gently. They lifted Maren onto a horse and wrapped her in furs without being asked. And Torvald took his own bearskin cloak warm from his enormous frame and dropped it over Isolde's trembling shoulders before she could refuse it. It smelled like him. Ozone and pine and something warm underneath. Her wolf sighed. Isolde wanted to scream. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him quiet as they made ready to ride. "You came to find your enemy. Instead, you've saddled yourself with 2 women you don't want and can't trust. You should have left us." Torvald was silent for a long moment. The wind pulled at his black hair. 30 years, he said. For 30 years I searched every valley in the north for the mate the moon promised me. I stopped believing she existed. I made my peace with dying alone." He turned then, and something raw moved behind his eyes. Something almost like grief. "And she was here, all this time, freezing, starving, bound to my enemy. Do you understand what a cruel joke that is?" "Yes," Isolde said softly. "I think I understand cruel jokes better than most." And for one strange, suspended moment in the ruined heart of the frozen wild, the exiled Omega and the Iron King simply looked at each other. 2 people the world had hollowed out in different ways. 2 people who had each made peace with dying alone. Then Torvald turned his horse north, and the 10 wolves rose, and the strange procession began to move. Isolde looked back once at the cabin, at the crude hearth she'd built with her own hands, at the 5 years of survival she was leaving behind. She did not know it yet, but she would never live there again. She only knew that her long solitude had ended, and that something far more dangerous had begun. The journey north took 2 days. 2 days of biting wind and the rhythmic thunder of wolf paws on frozen earth, a sound like a war drum that never stopped. Isolde rode bound, but warm. Maren beside her, the old woman surprisingly cheerful for someone who'd been threatened with abduction that morning. "He's handsome, at least," Maren murmured on the first night as they made camp beneath a stand of black pines. "The scarred ones always are. It's the tragedy. Women love a tragedy they think they can fix. I'm not going to fix anyone. No, Maren agreed, warming her old hands at the fire. But he might fix you, if you let him. Which you won't, because you're as stubborn as a frozen door. She patted Isolde's knee. It's my favorite thing about you. Isolde didn't answer, but across the camp in the dark, she could feel the king's eyes on her. She could feel him through the bond, too, whether she wanted to or not. A turbulent ocean pressed against the walls of her mind. Suspicion, denial, and beneath it, a dark, protective pull that terrified her far more than his wolves ever could, because she could feel that he wanted to trust her, and she could feel how badly he didn't want to want it. On the second day, they broke the tree line and the camp revealed itself. Not a camp, a fortress of canvas and iron. Hundreds of slate-gray tents in perfect ranks, thousands of battle-hardened warriors moving with lethal purpose. When Torvald rode through the iron gates, the entire host stopped and bowed their heads in absolute submission. But their sharp, predatory eyes all slid sideways to the ragged woman riding captive at their king's back. The exile, the Omega, the thing their king had brought home from the frozen edge of the world. Emmerich lifted Isolde down from her horse, gently, and she was led into the great command tent, a vast pavilion of maps and braziers and the pelts of monstrous beasts. Torvald dismissed his guards with a flick of his wrist, and the heavy canvas fell shut, and suddenly they were alone. The king paced, heavy boots on woven rugs, those storm-colored eyes dark and troubled. "You smell of ash and blood and starvation," he said at last. His voice was a physical weight in the small, warm space. "And yet beneath all of it, my beast knows your soul. A cruel joke of the goddess. I spent 30 years building an empire to keep my bloodline safe from southern treachery. And she gives me my queen in the frozen dirt, wearing the scars of the very pack I mean to destroy." Isolde lifted her chin. She would not let him see her hands shake. "I didn't ask for this bond, King Torvald. I didn't ask to be dragged into your war. I survived 5 years by burying my past so deep even I forgot where it was buried. And if you think I'm a spy for Aldrich of Thornwood, then all your legends are wrong and you're a fool besides." Torvald crossed the tent in 2 strides. The heat of him, the size of him. It pulled at everything in her that wanted to stop fighting, to press her face into his chest, and let something enormous stand between her and the world. She dug her nails into her palms and did not move. "Aldrich got into my vaults in the dead of night," Torvald said, low and furious, his face inches from hers. "Past 3 rings of my finest guards. He stole the Emberheart, a relic forged from the first star that ever fell on northern soil. It amplifies an alpha's command 100-fold. In the hands of a weak, ambitious boy, it turns free wolves into puppets. He'll build an army with no minds of their own. And my scouts tracked his scent straight through your territory, straight past your door. And that was when the pieces fell." Isolde's eyes went wide, because she remembered. 5 years ago, Rosalind, endlessly boasting, had spoken of a hidden place. A network of caverns deep in the eastern crags. The Weeping Caverns, behind a frozen waterfall. Unmapped. A secret sanctuary where she and Aldrich would one day rule far from the Elder's watching eyes. Aldrich hadn't stumbled past her cabin by accident. He'd used the one route no pack would follow. The Exile Lands. The Forbidden Ground. Because the Elders had decreed that no wolf of Silver Lake could set foot in the place where they'd thrown her. And so it was the one road no one would ever guard. "I know where he is," Isolde whispered. Torvald went utterly still. His huge hands came up and gripped her upper arms, and the contact sent a shock of lightning straight through her. "Speak." "The Weeping Caverns." Her voice gained strength as she said it, as the old rage dormant for years roared back to life. "East of my cabin, in the Black Crags. My sister found them years ago. The entrance is hidden behind a frozen fall. It's on no map anyone's ever drawn. If Aldrich is hiding, gathering his strength, learning to wield your relic, he's there. I would stake my life on it." Torvald searched her face, every inch of it, looking for the lie. He found only a broken woman burning, and slowly the hard lines of his face changed. The dominance in his aura shifted into something else, something dangerous, but pointed outward, now away from her. Something almost like protection. He lifted one rough thumb and traced the hollow of her cheek so lightly she barely felt it. "If you are lying to me, Isolde," he murmured, "I will not enjoy what I have to do, but I will do it." "I know. And if you are telling the truth, if you deliver my enemy to my blade, then I will drag your sister before the Iron Court. And I will see to it that no one ever again calls you weak." Isolde said nothing, because there were no words for what it did to her. That word turned inside out. Weak. The word Aldrich had carved into her in front of everyone she'd ever loved. And here was this terrible, enormous stranger, this frozen king, promising to bury it. She didn't trust him. But her wolf, the traitor, was already halfway in love. And somewhere in the camp beyond the tent, unseen, a man in Winterfang gray slipped out into the falling dark. He glanced once over his shoulder. Then he pulled his hood up and began to walk east toward the crags, carrying with him everything he had just overheard. The camp did not sleep the way an ordinary place sleeps. It rested the way a wolf rests, one eye open, muscles coiled, ready to become violence at the first wrong sound. And Isolde, who had spent 5 years sleeping with a spear across her knees, understood that kind of rest better than anyone. They gave her a tent of her own. Small but warm, near enough to the king's that she could feel him through the bond, even in the dark. Maren shared it with her, of course, and had claimed the warmest corner within the first hour. "You slept," Maren observed on the 3rd morning, grinding something green and pungent in a bowl she'd talked a quartermaster out of. "All night. No spear. First time in a year." "I didn't mean to. That's how you know it's real. The body decides it's safe before the mind gets a vote." Maren smiled. "Your body has cast its ballot, girl. Your mind is just being a poor loser about it." Isolde said nothing, because the worst part was that Maren was right. Her shoulders had come down from around her ears. Some animal part of her had smelled the king through 2 layers of canvas and simply decided without her permission that she could finally set the weight down. Trust was a door. She'd learned that in a great stone hall with the whole world watching. And doors, once you opened them, let in whatever was standing outside. So she got up, and she went to work. Because idle hands in her experience were how you ended up thinking too much. The camp had wounded men. Of course it did. Frostbite. Sword cuts turned sour. A boy of maybe 16 with a broken arm set so badly it had begun to knit crooked. Their healer had died at the last crossing of the ridge, and no one had replaced him. Isolde noticed the boy first, the way he held his arm against his body like something he was ashamed of, and she couldn't help herself. She never could. "That's set wrong," she said, crouching beside him. "It'll cripple you if it heals like that." The boy flinched away. "You're the Omega, the traitor." "I'm the person who can fix your arm," Isolde said. "Those aren't the same thing, whatever you've been told. Now hold still. Or hold still and cry your choice. But hold still." The boy screamed once. Then it was done set true and splinted tight, and he stared at her like she'd pulled a knife out of him, instead of putting his own bones back where they belonged. Word travels in a camp faster than fire. By that afternoon, there was a line outside her tent, because it turned out that an army full of hard men carries an ocean of small hurts it never speaks of. The frost-bitten toes, the wounds that wept. And here was a woman who would look at any of it without flinching, who asked no rank and demanded no thanks, whose hands were gentle, even when the medicine was not. She healed them, one after another, all through the short gray day. And she did not notice at first the king standing at the edge of it all, just watching, arms crossed over that enormous chest, because Torvald had come expecting to guard her. He stayed because he could not look away. He had been told his whole life what an Omega was: a weakness, a liability, a soft thing to be protected or bartered, or in the case of the treacherous South, poisoned into place. His own advisors had warned him the moment he brought her through the gates. "She is Silver Lake, my king. She is bound to your enemy. She is a knife you have chosen to sleep beside." And here she was, kneeling in the frozen mud of his war camp, setting the arm of a boy who'd called her a traitor to her face, and doing it anyway. That was not weakness. Torvald had spent 30 years around weakness and around strength, and he knew the difference in his bones. This was the rarer thing, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to exist. He had been wrong about her. The realization sat in his chest like a stone he hadn't known he was carrying until it moved. "You stare," Isolde said without turning around, wiping her hands on a cloth. "It's rude. Where I come from, staring gets you a spear. Where you come from threw you into the snow to die," Torvald said. "Perhaps their manners are not the standard we should hold to." And Isolde laughed. It surprised her. It came out before she could stop it, small and real, the first true laugh, in longer than she could remember. And when she turned, she caught the strangest thing on the king's scarred face: wonder. Like a man who has just discovered that the frozen thing in his chest is capable, after all, of a small and dangerous warmth. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't have to. Something had shifted quiet as snow, and they both felt it. That night they walked the perimeter together, not planned. She'd stepped out for air and found him already there, a black shape against the black trees, keeping watch, the way she suspected he always did. Because a king who trusts no one guards his own walls. They walked. The snow squeaked underfoot. The stars were terrible and bright. "Tell me about him," Torvald said at last. "Aldrich, what kind of man am I hunting?" "A weak one. He got past my guards. He got past your guards because my sister told him how." Isolde's breath plumed white. "That's the thing you don't understand yet. Aldrich has never had an original thought in his life. Everything he's done, everything he'll do, it's Rosalind. She's the mind. He's just the mouth that speaks her words." "And your sister, what does she want?" Isolde was quiet a moment. "To matter," she said finally. "We were twins, same face, same blood. But the moon paired me with the strongest alpha in 3 territories and passed her over like she wasn't there. And Rosalind decided, I think that if the world wouldn't give her worth, she'd take it. From me. piece by piece, until there was nothing of mine left that she hadn't made her own. She stared out at the dark. She wore my life like a stolen coat, and she made me the villain so no one would ask her a single question. Torvald listened, truly listened in a way she wasn't used to. "You loved her," he said. "Not a question. She was my sister." Isolde's voice cracked just slightly on the past tense. "There is no was that ever fully kills that. I hate her. I want to see her ruined. And some small stupid part of me still remembers braiding her hair when we were 6, and would give anything to have that back." She shook her head. "You can hate someone and grieve them at the same time. No one tells you that. But you can." The king was silent a long time. "Yes," he said finally. "I know." And he did. She could feel it through the bond. Some old wound of his own buried deep. Brothers or a father, or something worse. A grief he'd frozen solid decades ago so it would stop bleeding. They were the same. Both of them armored. Both of them convinced deep down that love was just a door someone opened to get close enough to hurt you. And ice, she was beginning to understand, was only a thing that hadn't been warmed yet, which terrified her. Because warmth was how they'd caught her the first time. The betrayal came from inside. It always does. Isolde should have known. Because the pack that raised her had taught her exactly that lesson in the cruelest possible way, and she had somehow let herself forget it in the warmth of a king's protection. It was Maren who noticed first. The old woman missed nothing. 81 years had made her invisible the way old women become invisible to everyone who thinks they've stopped mattering. And invisibility is its own kind of power. People say things in front of they've stopped seeing. "The fair one," Maren murmured one evening, watching a warrior cross the camp. "Halvard, second to your king. He takes long walks, east, after dark. He comes back smelling of a fire that isn't ours." Isolde's blood ran cold. Because east was the crags. East was the weeping caverns. East was Aldrich. "You're certain?" "I am old, not blind. I've watched men lie my whole life. It leaves a smell on them, same as smoke. That one's been lying to his king since before we arrived. And a lie that old has roots." Isolde went to Torvald that night, and this was the moment she'd been dreading. Because to warn him, she had to ask him to doubt his own. To look at the men he'd bled beside and wonder which one had a knife behind his back. And she, of all people, knew how that felt. To be the one pointing the finger. To be believed or not believed on nothing but her word. "You have a traitor," she said. No softening it. "You're second, Halvard. He walks east after dark and comes back smelling of a foreign fire." Torvald's face went very still. "Halvard has served me 11 years. So had the pack that raised me until they beat me and threw me out." Isolde held his gaze. I know how this sounds, coming from a stranger you've known a week. I know I'm asking you to doubt a man who's bled for you. And I know exactly what it costs to be the voice that says it, because I have stood where I'm standing right now and been called a liar for my trouble." She stepped closer. "But I would rather you hate me and be alive than trust me and be dead. Watch him. That's all I ask. Just watch." And Torvald watched, because he had learned in one short week that this woman did not lie to him. Whatever else she was, she had never once lied to him. So they set a trap. Simple. They let it slip in front of Halvard that the assault on the caverns would come in 3 days at the eastern approach at dawn. None of it was true. And that night, Halvard walked east. They followed him. Torvald, silent and enormous, moving through the black pines like the shadow of a mountain. Isolde beside him, because she had refused to be left behind. Because she had spent 5 years being told to stay in the cabin while men decided her fate, and she was done. She would never again wait quietly for someone else to decide whether she lived. They found Halvard at a dead fire in a hollow, speaking to a hooded figure, and the figure lowered its hood, and it was Rosalind. Isolde stopped breathing, because there she was, her twin, her mirror, golden braids and clean skin, and that same face Isolde saw in every still pool of water, wearing furs, like a queen standing in the snow, as if she owned the whole cold world. 3 days eastern approach, Halvard was saying. At dawn, I'll leave the northern gate unwatched. You'll have a clear line to the king. Good, Rosalind's voice. That voice. It went through Isolde like a blade she'd been stabbed with before. Aldrich will want him alive. He has plans for a king. But the Omega... And here Rosalind smiled, and it was the worst thing Isolde had ever seen, because it was her own smile turned to poison. The Omega dies. My sister has embarrassed this family long enough by refusing to have the decency to freeze. Isolde's hand found her spear, and Torvald's found her wrist. Gentle, steady, a silent no. Not yet, because they had what they needed. The traitor. The lie. The trap turned back on itself. But Isolde was not thinking about strategy. Isolde was thinking about a girl with golden braids who used to be 6 years old, who used to laugh at the same jokes, who used to be the other half of her, and who now stood in the snow, calmly discussing her murder, as if she were ordering supper. You can hate someone and grieve them at the same time. She had said that. She hadn't known until this exact moment how much it would hurt to have it proven true. They slipped away before they were seen, and it was only later back in the dark of the command tent that Isolde let herself shake. She was going to kill me, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. She talked about it like the weather. My own sister. The other half of me. I know. I keep thinking there's a version of her that would stop. Some line she wouldn't cross. And there isn't. There was never a line. I just needed to believe there was one because... Her voice broke. Because otherwise I have to accept that she never loved me. Not once. Not ever. That I've been grieving a person who was never real. And Torvald the Iron King, who had never in his life known what to do with a crying woman, did the only thing his enormous frozen heart could think to do. He crossed the tent, and he pulled her against his chest, and he held her. Not the way you hold something you own. The way you hold something you're afraid of breaking. She was real, he said into her hair, his voice a low rumble she felt more than heard. The sister you braided when she was 6 was real. What she became does not erase what she was. It only means she chose to bury it. That is her shame, Isolde, not yours. You loved a real thing. The fact that she killed it does not make your love a lie. And Isolde wept. She wept without shame into the chest of a man she'd known 1 week, and she let him hold her, and she did not reach for her spear even once, which should have terrified her, and did, but not enough to make her pull away. They dealt with Halvard quietly. Torvald did not want a spectacle. A public execution would only tell Rosalind her plan had failed. So Halvard vanished in the night, taken in his sleep, questioned in the dark. And what he gave up under that questioning changed everything. Because Halvard, it turned out, was not the mind behind the betrayal either. Neither was Rosalind. Not fully. There's an elder, Halvard confessed when there was nothing left to do but confess. Silver Lake, old, Vorn. He's the one who set all of it in motion years ago. The Wolfsbane, the framing of the Omega, the theft of your relic. Rosalind thinks she's using Aldrich. Aldrich thinks he's building an empire. But it's Vorn pulling both their strings. He wants the Emberheart for himself. The children are just his hands. Isolde stood very still when they told her. Because Elder Vorn. She knew that name. Everyone in Silver Lake knew that name. The oldest of the elders. The one who spoke rarely and was obeyed absolutely. The one who had stood at the front of the Great Hall on the night of her rejection and said nothing, did nothing, watched them beat her, and cast her out with those flat, patient, ancient eyes. She had thought his silence was indifference. It had been satisfaction. He had built her ruin, brick by brick. He had used her sister's jealousy like a tool, sharpened it, aimed it. He had needed a scapegoat for the poison, and a broken girl on the edge of the territory, bound by the bond to a boy he could control, was perfect. She had never been a person to Elder Vorn. She had been a piece, moved across a board she couldn't even see. 5 years. 5 years of believing the cruelty was personal. That Rosalind hated her, that Aldrich had wanted a stronger mate, that it had been about her. Some flaw in her, something she'd done or failed to do. And it had never been about her at all. She had been a convenient shape, nothing more. She didn't know whether that made it better or worse. He turned my whole life into a game piece, she said slowly. My sister, my mate, my exile. 5 years in the snow, all of it. Just moves, just a means to an end. I wasn't even the point. No, Torvald said. You were never the point to him. He stepped close and lifted her chin so she'd meet his eyes. But you are the point to me. Whatever you were to Vorn, whatever you were to that pack, hear me. You are not a piece on anyone's board any longer. You are the woman who is going to bring the whole board down. And something in Isolde, something that had been bent double for 5 years, began very slowly to straighten. Because that was the moment it stopped being about survival, or even revenge. It became something cleaner and colder and far more dangerous. Justice. They would take the Emberheart back. They would drag Vorn into the light. And Isolde would be the one who did it. Not as a victim finally rescued, but as a woman reclaiming a life stolen from her before she'd ever had the chance to live it. It was Maren who gave her the last piece. The night before they marched. The old woman had gone quiet all evening, watching Isolde clean her spear by the fire, and finally she spoke, and her voice had a weight to it Isolde had never heard before. There's a thing I should have told you sooner, Maren said. I didn't, because I wasn't sure. And because once I say it, you'll do something reckless, and I've grown fond of you, and I'd like to keep you. She sighed. But you're marching to war regardless, so I might as well arm you. Maren. What? That relic. The Emberheart. Maren's old eyes reflected the flames. It amplifies command. Alpha command. Everyone knows that. But there's an older story from before the packs kept careful records. The star it was forged from didn't fall on empty ground. It fell on a bloodline. A line of Omegas, the healing kind. Moon-touched the old word was. And the stone didn't just take power from that line. It answered to it. Isolde's hands went still on the spear. The healing gift runs in blood. Maren went on, watching her carefully. It skips and hides, and gets called weak by fools who only value what can kill. But it runs true. And I have watched you set bones and draw fevers, and mend men a trained healer would have buried. I have watched the stone's own aura when it flickers across the miles wash over this camp and lay men flat. She reached out and took Isolde's cold hand in her warm, knotted ones. And I have watched it not touch you at all. The fire cracked. You think I think, Maren said gently, that the pack called you weak because you couldn't birth an alpha. And I think that same blood is the oldest, rarest, most powerful thing in this entire war. I think the stone Aldrich stole doesn't belong to the north or the south. I think it belongs to your line. And I think, girl, that you are the only living soul it will not be able to command. Isolde sat very still in the firelight at the end of the world, because for 23 years she had been told what she was. Weak, unfit, treacherous, a stain, a ghost, a thing to be thrown away. And every single one of them had been wrong. She was not the weakness in this story. She had never been the weakness. She was the one thing on the whole frozen board that none of them, not Aldrich, not Rosalind, not even old Vorn, with his patient ancient eyes, had ever thought to be afraid of. They should have let me freeze, Isolde said softly, and there was something in her voice now that hadn't been there before. Something like iron. It would have been kinder to them. Maren smiled. Yes, she agreed. It would have. Outside the tent, the wind rose. The army stirred in its restless sleep. And to the east, past the black pines behind a frozen waterfall, an old man with patient eyes waited for a relic he believed was already his. He did not know yet. He did not know that the piece he'd discarded 5 years ago was still on the board. He didn't know she was coming. And he did not know, could not have known that, of all the mistakes Elder Vorn had made in his long and calculating life, the greatest by far had been failing to make sure the girl was dead. Isolde rose in the firelight and slid her spear onto her back. Get some sleep, she told Maren. We march at dawn. They marched at dawn. 2 days through the eastern crags. 2 days of black obsidian stone and howling wind and snow that came sideways, blinding, relentless. The kind of cold that gets into a person and stays. Isolde rode at the center of the column now, not as a captive, not as a guide, as something the whole army had quietly, without ceremony, begun to treat as theirs. The men she'd healed nodded to her as she passed. The boy with the mended arm rode near her proud, like a squire who'd chosen his own knight. She wore northern leathers, warm and well-made, a sable cloak, dark and heavy, and on her back, the same crude, iron-tipped spear she'd carried out of Hollowpine because she had refused every finer weapon they offered her. That thing's held together with hope and dried sinew, Emmerich had said, eyeing it. So am I, Isolde had answered. It's gotten me this far. Maren rode too, bundled in furs, complaining cheerfully about her hips, refusing every suggestion that she stay behind. I have waited 81 years to watch the right people get what's coming to them, the old woman said. I am not missing it for the sake of my hips. And Torvald rode at the head of them all. But something had changed between the king and the exile, and everyone could feel it. The bond had stopped being a war. It had become a thing they leaned into instead of against. When the wind howled hardest, he would drift his horse nearer to hers, saying nothing, just close. When his old grief rose up in the dark, she would find his eyes across the fire and hold them until it passed. They had not spoken of it. There had been no words, no vows, none of the things the songs promised. There had only been this: two people who had each stopped bracing for the blow, which was Isolde was beginning to understand its own kind of love. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply stands beside you in the cold and refuses to leave. On the second night, he found her at the edge of the camp, staring east toward the crags where her enemies waited. "You're afraid," he said. "I'm not." Isolde. She was quiet a moment. "I'm afraid of what I'll do when I see her," she admitted. "Rosalind. I've spent 5 years imagining it. Killing her. And now that it's close, I don't know if I want to be the kind of woman who can." She looked at him. "Does that make me weak?" "No." His scarred face was grave in the firelight. "It makes you the only one in this whole war worth following." And she believed him. That was the strangest part. After 5 years of trusting no one, she believed him. The weeping caverns waited behind a wall of frozen water. A waterfall stopped mid-fall by the deep cold, hanging in great blue-white ropes of ice, beautiful and terrible, hiding the black mouth of the cavern behind it. And the closer they came, the worse the air grew, because it was there. The Ember Heart. Isolde could feel it before she could see anything. A pressure that wasn't the altitude. A suffocating wave of alpha dominance, rolling out from the ice, chaotic and enormous and wrong. It vibrated with a power that hadn't been earned. A stolen crown, radiating a stolen light. The men felt it too. She watched it hit them. Watched hardened warriors stagger. Watched some drop to their knees, hands to their heads. Faces gray as the relic's raw command washed over the whole column and tried to fold them flat. It washed over Isolde and parted around her like water around a stone. She didn't stagger. She didn't kneel. She stood in the middle of that crushing wave and felt nothing but a faint, warm hum in her blood, the way you feel a fire in another room. Torvald saw it. His gaze found her standing untouched amid 100 kneeling men, and something crossed his face that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not surprise. Certainty. Maren had told the truth. "He's trying to bond with it," Torvald growled, drawing the great rune-etched broadsword from his back. "He's bleeding its power into the open air. He's careless. He doesn't understand what he holds." He turned to her, and his voice dropped low and fierce. "Stay behind, Emmerich. The stone will try to crush your mind. Anchor yourself to my scent. I am your Torvald." Isolde put her hand flat on his armored chest. "Look at me." He looked. "It can't touch me," she said quietly. "You saw. It parted around me like I wasn't even there." Maren was right. That stone answers to my blood, not against it. So I'm not staying behind, Emmerich. Her amber eyes held his. "I'm the only one here it can't command, which makes me the sharpest weapon you have. Don't waste me by hiding me." And she watched him war with it. Watched 30 years of instinct. The alpha's need to shield his mate crash against the plain and terrible truth of what she'd just said. Watched him want more than anything to lock her behind a wall of his own warriors where nothing could reach her. And watched him instead do the hardest thing a protective man can ever do. Trust her to protect herself. "Then we go together," he said. And it cost him. She could feel exactly what it cost him. Side by side, not behind. Side by side, she agreed, and a horn shattered the frozen silence. The waterfall exploded. The great ropes of ice burst outward in a storm of deadly, jagged shards, and from the black mouth of the cavern they poured. Dozens of Silver Lake warriors, their eyes gone entirely black, their bodies jerking and trembling under a control that was not their own. Faces she half recognized. Wolves she'd grown up beside. Now hollowed out, made into puppets driven forward without a shred of will remaining. And behind them he came. Aldrich. 5 years had made him grand and made him nothing. He wore a crown of jagged silver, and set into the center of his chest plate, pulsing with a sick crimson glow, was the Ember Heart. He'd grown broad. He'd grown fine. He looked at last like the king he'd always believed he deserved to be. And Isolde looked at him and felt the strangest thing. Nothing. Because she had spent 5 years thinking about this man, hating him, grieving him, and now, seeing him at last, crowned and swollen with stolen power, she understood what Marin had known all along. He was small. He had always been small. A mouth that spoke other people's words, and a hand that swung other people's swords, and there was nothing in him worth 5 years of her rage. She had wasted so much winter on so little a man. Beside him stood Rosalind, draped in furs, golden braids, gleaming chin lifted like a queen, surveying her lands. And behind them both, half in shadow at the cavern's mouth, stood an old man with patient, ancient, terrible eyes, Vorn. King Torvald! Aldrich's voice boomed, amplified by the stone, into something huge and hollow. It lacked the natural, earth-deep resonance of the real king's command. It was loud, the way an empty room is loud. You are too late. The relic answers to my blood now. The south is mine, and soon your frozen north will kneel to the house of Thornwood. Torvald did not boast. He did not answer at all. He simply threw back his head and roared a sound that shook loose the snow from the peaks above, and charged. And the world became noise and blood. The 10-iron fang elites tore into the mind-controlled ranks with terrible discipline, and the puppets fought back without fear, without sense, without any regard for their own bodies, because the stone gave them no choice. Blood sprayed black across the white snow and froze where it landed. Steel rang on steel. The cavern mouth became a slaughter. Isolde moved through it like she'd been born to it, because she had, in a way. 5 years alone in the killing cold had taught her how to survive when everything wanted her dead. She ducked a blade, drove her spear butt into a knee, slipped between 2 puppets, and kept moving, always moving, her eyes fixed on one figure across the chaos, Rosalind, who had seen her now, whose face had gone white with something between fury and disbelief. Because there she was, the sister who was supposed to be dead, the embarrassment, who'd refused to freeze alive and armed and walking toward her through a battlefield. You, Rosalind breathed, as Isolde broke through the last of the fighting. You should have died in that snow. Why won't you ever just die? I tried, Isolde said, for a while. And then I decided I'd rather live to see your face do exactly what it's doing right now. Rosalind drew a curved dagger and lunged, and the twins clashed. Same blood, same face, same childhood buried somewhere under all that ruin. But Rosalind had spent 5 years warm and fed and comfortable, and Isolde had spent 5 years learning to survive on nothing, and the difference showed in every strike. Rosalind was skilled. Isolde was starving, desperate, and a woman who has already lost everything fights like she has nothing left to protect. Because she doesn't. The dagger caught Isolde across the cheek, a bright line of pain. She didn't even flinch. She pivoted, drove the butt of her spear into Rosalind's kneecap, and as her sister buckled with a scream, Isolde spun and drove the iron tip clean through Rosalind's shoulder, pinning her to the frozen ground. Rosalind shrieked, and Isolde stood over her spear, buried in her sister's flesh chest, heaving, and looked down at the face that was her own. This was the moment. 5 years of imagining it. The dagger was right there in the snow. She could end it. She had every right on earth to end it. "Do it!" Rosalind snarled up at her teeth, bared tears freezing on her cheeks. "That's what this is, isn't it? Finish it. Prove you're just as much a monster as you always said I was." And Isolde's hand tightened on the spear, because part of her wanted to. God help her. Part of her wanted to so badly. It was a physical ache. 5 years. The snow. The scars. The night in the great hall. The girl with golden braids who had been the other half of her and had thrown it all away for jealousy and a crown. Except she saw it then. Under the fury, under the poison. She saw the 6-year-old. She saw the twin she'd braided by firelight. She saw the sister who had been just as trapped by a system that measured a woman only by the strength of the man she could catch. A system that had told Rosalind over and over that she was worth nothing next to her sister until the jealousy had grown teeth and eaten her whole. It didn't excuse it. Nothing excused it. But it explained it. And there is a difference. And Isolde, standing in the blood-stained snow, understood that she had a choice her sister had never given her. She could become the thing that had been done to her, or it could be something better. "No," Isolde said quietly, and she pulled the spear from her sister's shoulder and she stepped back. "You wanted me to be the monster, so you could feel less like one," Isolde said, breathing hard. "I won't give you that. You don't get to die a martyr. You get to live. And you get to stand before the Iron Court and answer for every single thing you did. That's not mercy, Rosalind. Mercy would be quick. This is justice. You're going to live a long time knowing exactly what you are." And she turned her back on her sister, which was the bravest thing Isolde had ever done. Braver than the spear, braver than the fight. Because turning your back on the person who ruined you, walking away with your life instead of your revenge, is the hardest walk in the world. She'd taken 2 steps when she heard Torvald's voice tear across the battlefield. "Isolde." She turned and saw Aldrich forgotten in the chaos, his false mate fallen, raising his hand toward her. Saw the ember heart in his chest flare a blinding, sickening crimson. Saw the beam of stolen power gathering, aimed straight at her heart. There was no time to move. She braced, and an enormous shadow eclipsed her. Torvald. He threw himself between Isolde and the blast, and the crimson energy slammed into his broad back, and his armor smoked, and his flesh sizzled, and he did not fall. Because the ember heart was forged to subjugate, to crush the will of any wolf and bend it flat. And Aldrich Small, clever, cruel. Aldrich had fundamentally misunderstood what he was pointing it at. Torvald was not just an alpha. He was a monarch fueled by 1,000 years of ancient northern blood, and in that moment, he was fueled by something older and stronger than any bloodline. The absolute animal unbreakable need to keep this one woman alive. He absorbed it. All of it. And he turned smoking, agonized, and looked at her over his shoulder, and there was no fear in his eyes. Only love. Terrible and total. "Go," he said through gritted teeth, holding the blast on his own back. "Finish it. I'll hold him. Finish it, Isolde." And she ran. Not at Aldrich, at the stone, because she understood now all at once the thing that Maren had planted, and the battle had confirmed. The Emberheart did not answer to Alpha Blood. It never had. Aldrich wasn't wielding it. He was borrowing it badly, bleeding its power into the air, like a man who'd stolen a language he couldn't speak. The stone had been forged from a star that fell on her bloodline. The healing line. The moon-touched line. The one the Pax had called weak for 1,000 years because it mended instead of killed. It belonged to her. She reached Aldrich. He swung the beam toward her, desperate, screaming, "No, the stone commands you. The stone commands everyone." "The stone doesn't command me," Isolde said. And she laid her bare hand flat against the Emberheart, and the world went white. Because the moment her blood touched the star-forged stone, the stone recognized what it had been made from. The crimson light guttered, flickered, turned for one impossible heartbeat to pure silver white, the color of moonlight, the color of the healing that fools had spent 1,000 years calling weak. And then it went dark. The power died all at once. Every black-eyed puppet on that battlefield staggered, blinked, and came back into their own minds, gasping, weeping, released. The mind control snapped like a cut thread. The stolen crown became in an instant nothing but a cooling rock in a small man's chest. Aldrich stared at the dead relic, then at Isolde. "How?" he whispered. "How? You're weak. You were always weak. Everyone said—" "Everyone was wrong," Isolde said. "About both of us." And Torvald, freed, the instant the beam did cross the space between them in one enormous stride, and with a single brutal swing of his broadsword, ended Aldrich's reign at the shoulder. The false king fell screaming, and the Emberheart rolled harmlessly into the snow. Gray and quiet, and finally, truly still. Silence fell over the crags, broken only by the wind and the weeping of freed men, and the small pathetic sounds of 2 fallen traitors bleeding in the snow. And then Isolde remembered. Vorn. She spun toward the cavern mouth where the old man with the patient eyes had stood. He was gone. Of course he was gone. Because that was what men like Vorn did. They stood at the back. They moved the pieces. And the moment the pieces fell, they slipped away into the shadows, to begin again somewhere else with new pieces having risked nothing of themselves at all. The tracks led east into the deeper crags already half-filled with blowing snow. "He'll keep," Torvald said, coming to stand beside her, breathing hard, his armor blackened and smoking. "Men like that always run. It means the story isn't over. But today is yours, Isolde. Don't let the one who ran steal it from you." And she let it go. For now. Because Torvald was right. That old man was a winter for another day, and she would not let his shadow spoil the light of this one. She dropped her spear in the snow. And she turned. And Torvald was already there, and she threw her arms around his enormous neck and pressed her face into the crook of his shoulder, and the bond flared between them. Brilliant and warm and healing, wrapping around them both like a thing that had been waiting 5 long years to finally close. His arms came around her, careful even now, even bleeding, even smoking. He held her like she was the one precious thing left in a hard world. "You reckless woman," he murmured into her ash-scented hair. But there was no anger in it. Only relief, so deep it shook. "You ran at the one thing on this field that could unmake you." "I'm a survivor," Isolde said, pulling back just enough to find his eyes. "I don't hide behind my alpha. I never did." A breath. "But I'll stand beside one, if he'll let me." And Torvald, the Iron King of the North, the man whose heart had frozen decades ago and whom everyone swore had thawed. For no one looked down at this starving, scarred, stubborn, extraordinary woman, and smiled. "Side by side," he said, they bound the traitors, Aldrich bleeding and broken and screaming still. Rosalind pale and shaking, staring at the sister who had chosen not to kill her with something that might in 100 years become understanding. "Take them both," Torvald commanded his vanguard. "They'll answer to the Iron Court for all of it, and they'll name Vorn before that court, in front of every elder in the north and south, so there's not a hole left in the world for that old man to hide in." And then he turned to the freed men, the former puppets, the Silver Lake wolves who'd been made into weapons against their will, now huddled and weeping and lost in the snow. "You tut," he said, and his voice gentled in a way none of his warriors had ever heard. "You are not prisoners. You were used, the same as she was used." He nodded toward Isolde. "Go home. Tell your pack what happened here. Tell them the Omega they threw away is the one who set you free." They went, slowly, some of them looking back at Isolde with faces full of a shame that would take years to heal. She let them go, every one, because she knew better than anyone alive that being used against your will is a wound, not a crime. And she would not become one more person who punished the broken for the sins of the ones who broke them. There was talk on the long road home of thrones, of Silver Lake burning, of Isolde, crowned queen over the ashes of the pack that had cast her out. Torvald had promised her that once, in the command tent on the first night, a throne forged of their bones. She turned it down. "I don't want a throne made of their bones," she told him in the quiet after. "I spent 5 years being what they made of me. I won't spend the rest of my life defined by them, even in victory." Burning Silver Lake wouldn't unfreeze a single one of those winters. It would just make me the thing they always said I was. "Then what do you want?" Torvald asked. "Anything in the north is yours. Only name it." And Isolde looked back over the white miles toward a cabin at the edge of the world, where an old woman had once hummed a dying song into the snow. "I want a place," she said slowly, "for the ones nobody wants. The old ones the packs walk out past the border and leave behind. The exiles, the Omegas everyone calls weak, the thrown away." She turned to him. "You have all this land, Torvald, all this power. Give me a corner of it. Let me build the thing I needed when I was freezing alone and no one came. Let me be the one who comes." And the Iron King, who had spent 30 years building an empire out of fear, looked at this woman who wanted to build a home out of mercy, and understood finally completely why the moon had chosen her. "Not a corner," he said. "As much as you need, as much as they need, and you won't build it alone." He took her scarred hand in his enormous one. "You have a partner now, side by side. You said it yourself." Maren, riding nearby, wiped her old eyes and pretended it was the wind. "About time," the old woman muttered. "I'm 81. I don't have decades to wait on the two of you being brave." And Isolde laughed. the real kind. The kind that came easy now. They built it that spring. A settlement in a sheltered northern valley, green and warm, ringed by mountains that broke the worst of the wind. A place with a name that traveled quietly at first, and then not quietly at all through the north and eventually south past the borders. A place where a wolf too old to hunt was not walked out into the snow, but given a warm hearth and a purpose and the dignity of being wanted. Where an Omega the songs called weak could come and learn. The songs were written by fools. Where the discarded and the thrown away could arrive half-frozen at the gate the way Isolde had once knelt half-frozen in the wild, and be met always by someone who came. Marin ran the healing houses until the day she died, 3 good years later, warm in a soft bed, with Isolde's hand in hers, having lived to see exactly as she'd wanted, the right people get the lives they deserved. And Isolde, who had been rejected, framed, beaten, exiled, and left to freeze, who had been called weak by everyone who ever held power over her, who had spent 5 winters believing the world's verdict on her worth. Isolde became the Queen of the North. Not because a bond decreed it, not as a prize handed to her by a king, but because she had walked into the coldest place in the world, with nothing, and built something warm, and refused through all of it to let the cruelty of others turn her cruel. She kept the old iron-tipped spear, hung it over the great hearth of the settlement she'd built, and sometimes on the hardest winter nights, she would look at it and remember the girl who'd carried it out of Hollow Pine, starving and alone, and certain she was worthless. And she would want so badly to reach back through the years and tell that girl the truth. You are not weak. You were never weak. The people who threw you away told you a story about your worth, and it was a lie. And one day you will burn that lie to the ground and build something beautiful on the ashes. Hold on. Someone is coming. It's you. You're the one who comes. Far to the east, in the deep crags, an old man with patient eyes made his slow way through the snow, nursing his defeat, already reaching for new pieces to move across a new and colder board. But that is a story for another winter. For now there was a valley full of the once discarded living lives they'd been told they didn't deserve. There was a scarred king who had learned at last how to be gentle. And there was a woman with amber eyes who had been thrown away by the whole world, and who had, against every prediction, every verdict, every cruelty the cold could throw at her, not merely survived, risen.